Hello everybody, welcome to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today we're going to be going over the top 10 teams for the 2022 season of Rainbow Six Siege. So not strictly the 2022 calendar year, we won't be including SI22, we'll be talking about SI 2023 instead, as it is the capstone to the 2022 season. And of course, we'll be talking about stages 1, 2, and 3 of 2022, as well as their corresponding majors in Charlotte, Berlin, and Jönköping. The international performances, especially SI, will be weighted more so than their regional performances. And when I do reference their overall regional performance, I'm talking about their total points from among stages 1, 2, and 3 within their region. So NA, EU, so on and so forth. Okay, before we get to the proper top 10, let's do one honorable mention. I'm going to give it to FaZe Clan. They're the only team not on the top 10 proper that made it to the grand final of a major this year, but that's really all they did. They did make it to SI, but they only made it to top 16. They didn't place top 4 in their region overall. They got 5th. So again, that grand final appearance in Berlin was the only really impressive thing they did. And I think everyone above them on this list has more accolades or more impressive accolades to justify them being in the top 10. So let's move on to number 10. We have M80. So these guys have been one of the more consistent teams this year. They made it to 2 of the 3 majors. Everyone on this list has gone to at least one of the majors, and they made it to SI. Everyone on this list has made it to SI, but they do have pretty good showings at each of them. So within their own region, they placed top 4 overall in NA, and then they made top 8 at Charlotte, top 4 at Berlin, then they missed out on Jönköping, but they made top 8 at SI, so no lower than a top 8 placement at all of the events they made it to, and they did make it to 3 out of 4 of them. Is pretty impressive overall. Moving on to number 9, if you want to talk about consistency, these guys might be the very best, because not only were they at all the events, one of only 2 teams to do so, but they had better. Well, they didn't get any worse in their placements, I should say. They made top 12 at Charlotte, top 8 in Berlin, top 8 in Jönköping, and top 6 at SI, as well as being the top team overall in EUL by way of points. So just impressive stuff across the board, but most of the teams above them on this list, if not all of them, have a more outstanding achievement. So we'll talk about that. I do think like the bottom half of this list, 6 through 10, you could sort of reorganize depending on what you prioritize, and I think that'll become a little bit more clear as we move on to number 8 here. We have Dark Zero. So that means there's 7 teams above these guys, but there are only 3 other teams that won an event this year. These guys placed first in Charlotte, but that was really the only thing they did. I'm not really penalizing teams for having their good achievements be early. It is supposed to just be throughout the entire year. Looking at their achievements, it's not just a look at who's the best team right now, because of course they haven't really done anything terribly impressive since then. I'm not letting that hurt them too much, but I do think and the teams that you might reorganize them within this list are probably the 2 above them. So we'll talk about that in a second, but they have higher achievements than those 2 teams, but those 2 other teams have multiple impressive showings, whereas Dark Zero, again, only have the 1. Within NA, they placed 3rd overall, only making it to 1 major though. They placed like 3rd, 5th, or something like that. And at SI, they made top 12, which is good, but not a massively impressive showing. So let's move on to the teams that I've been alluding to a little bit. Next up, we have Oxygen, and I think this team and the next team are also really, really close. So Oxygen, 2nd place overall in NA. They made top 4 in Charlotte, top 12 in Berlin, didn't make it to Jönköping, so that's a pretty steep decline, but still they made it to 2 of those 3 majors, made top 4 of one of them, and then they made top 3 at SI, their crowning achievement. Really, really impressive. I do think a lot of people would say that their group and then their run through the bracket was one of the easier ones, so maybe that takes a little bit of credit away from them, but top 3 at SI is still top 3 at SI, as well as being number 2 within their region. Quite impressive stuff overall. They did have a pretty big slump in stage 3, the first half at least. They brought it back, were really, really good. The latter half, not good enough to make the major, and then they went on to place top 3 at SI. So they've been in pretty good form as of late, but do let me know if you guys think they deserve to be a little bit higher on this list. I think that's entirely possible. Maybe even a little bit lower, depending on what you value. Next up, we have Team Liquid. So, right, Oxygen, they made it to top 3 of SI. These guys made it to top 2 of a major, and they were 1 map away from winning it in the best of 5 versus BDS. So Liquid's achievements, they got top 2 in LATAM, and they made the Charlotte major top 4. They didn't go to Berlin, but then they made, as I mentioned before, top 2 in Jönköping, just barely losing out to BDS in the grand final. And then they went to SI, and a very lackluster showing, only top 16. So they have a lower low in terms of the tournaments they went to compared to Oxygen, but they have a higher high if you consider top 2 at a major better than top 3 at SI. Some people might not. And then comparing both of these to Dark Zero, right? Dark Zero had the 1 first place, but Liquid had a top 4 and a top 2 at a major. Oxygen had a top 4 at a major and a top 3 at SI. So do let me know if you guys think Dark Zero deserves to be higher because they actually won something. Let me know if maybe Oxygen should be higher than Liquid based on their SI performance. Whatever the case, I think it gets a little bit less contentious from here. So let's move on to number 5. We have Koi. So these guys are actually pretty similar to Dark Zero in that they only went to 1 major and they won that major, and then they went to SI, but their SI performance much better than Dark Zero's. They topped their group and then they made it all the way to top 6, which is several rounds beyond where Dark Zero made it to. They only placed top 5 within their region. They placed 5th place, so not even within the top 4. Which isn't spectacular, but I mean, it was good enough to make one of the majors, which they won. They were good enough to make SI, which they had a deep run in. So I'm not going to penalize them very much at all for their regional performance. And I mean, in fact, even if they were higher or lower, I don't think it really would affect their placement on this list. But I think it's pretty hard to argue that these guys are not number 5, maybe plus or minus 1, I guess, but I don't really see it. Moving on, we have number 4, Astralis. So these guys are well, they're not actually the highest on the list that didn't win an event, but we'll get to them. 2 more event winners to go through and 3 more places, so we'll see where everyone lands. They made top 2 in Charlotte. They made it to the grand final, and then they made Berlin, but they were last place in their group, so only top 16. A really steep decline. Then they didn't make it to Jönköping, and had that been the end of it, had they had got grouped at SI or first or second rounded or something, they'd be much lower on this list, but they made a very deep run through the losers bracket, which they were seeded into initially based on their group stage performance, all the way up to 4th place, and they were top 1 in NA stage 1 and stage 2, and not especially good in stage 3, but it was still good enough overall to take the top spot in the aggregated standings. So one more time, top 2 in Charlotte, top 16 in Berlin, top 4 at SI, and number 1 in NA, I think is enough accolades to comfortably put them at number 4 here. Moving on to number 3, we have BDS, and they fell off, I guess, a little bit. They were on such a hot streak, and including some events I'm not even counting on this list, a few invitationals, one in the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa region, Saudi Arabia specifically, Japan Invitational as well, and they won the Jönköping Major, came into SI so hot, and they didn't get a terrible placement, but definitely below what probably they expected of themselves and certainly what other people expected of them. So let's talk about these things. Namely, BDS made top 8 in Charlotte, didn't make it to Berlin, but then they won the Jönköping Major and they made top 8 at SI. Only top 3 within Europe. They did play in the finals and won that, but that's not really what I'm counting because you can't compare that across regions. Not everyone had finals. So yeah, 3rd place in EU, but still 2 top 8 finishes, one of them at SI and a major win. One of the most impressive teams of the year, landing them at number 3. Number 2, we have G2. So yeah, the world champions did not quite make number 1, and I think it's fair. We'll talk about the other team in just a second. G2 made top 8 in Charlotte, top 8 in Berlin, missed out on Jönköping, and then won the 6th Invitational. They are the lowest placing team within their region on this list. They only placed 6th overall in EU, but again, good enough to make 2 of the majors. They made it out of groups out of both those majors, and they made a really impressive losers run to take SI. They were seeded into the winners bracket, lost their first round, and then won 6 matches in a row or something to take down the grand final, take down W7M in the grand final and lift the hammer. So really impressive year by them. Obviously they'd be much lower if they didn't have this SI accomplishment, but don't forget that they did make it to 2 majors and made it out of groups at both those majors. And finally, number 1, you probably know who it is at this point. It is W7M. So they are the highest team on the list, but they did not actually take anything home. A little bit weird, but they were just so consistent and so dominant. I don't think you can put them anywhere but number 1. Top 12 in Charlotte, and their performance there was certainly hampered by the visa issues. They had to play remotely. They were probably and almost certainly tilted out of their minds. Anyways, they go to Berlin, make top 4. They go to Jönköping, also make top 4. They go to SI, and they make top 2. They fell in the grand final. They only lost 2 series the entire event, 1 to Koi and 1 to G2 in that grand final. And not to mention, they were also number 1 in LATAM. They were definitely the most dominant team within their region of any team in any region. They went 22-5 over the course of all 3 stages in best of ones. Really, really impressive. They placed second, first, I believe, in the 3 stages of Copa Elite 6, which is LATAM's little qualifier thing to determine who goes to the major. So just really, really impressive stuff all around. The only slight blemish being the top 12 at Charlotte, but still they made it to a major. They didn't even get last place. There's a good reason why they didn't make it out of that group. Yeah, these guys have just been crazy. Unfortunate for them, they could not cap it off with that SI win, but still, I think they were the most impressive team over the course of the entire year. And so let me know what you guys think. I believe these are almost certainly the top 10 teams. Again, I believe 6 through 10, you could maybe reorder. 1 through 5, I think it's pretty solidified. Maybe you think G2 deserves number 1. And, you know, maybe Koi above Astralis because Koi actually has a win, but do let me know what you guys think. A like and a subscription would also be appreciated. And with all of that being said, I will catch you guys in the next video.